Hi, my name is Kiara, and I've gone through some insane things. When I was younger, my life was like something out of a storybook, and then it became a horror movie. I grew up in a loving home with my mom and dad. For so long, everything seemed great. Both my parents loved me, I got good grades, people at school liked me, and I was even dating a cute boy named James. I mean, honestly, I was kind of living the dream. And then I entered high school. I started drifting away from my mom because she started being secretive and weird. She quit her job and I never found out why. When I asked, she got teary-eyed and walked away from me. Some nights she slept on the couch, and some nights I even caught her up in the attic, moving old boxes around. It was really confusing. By the time I was a sophomore, I could hear her and my dad fighting with each other every night through the walls. It made me feel unsafe and super uncomfortable. One night, my dad left for a business trip. I hate to say it, but I was relieved. My dad was my hero, and when my mom acted weird, he was there in ways she wasn't. But him being gone meant no more fighting, so I was excited. Or should I say, I was excited for about an hour. An hour after he left, I heard the front door fly open, and heavy boots rush into the house. I crawled out of bed and walked downstairs to see the absolute last thing I would have expected. There was a man standing in my living room, helping my mom frantically drag boxes out of the house. I couldn't breathe. I didn't even know what to say. I had never seen the man before in my life, and my mom was crying. When my mom looked up and saw me, she pulled me out of the house after her and tried to force me into the man's car. I started screaming, demanding to know what was going on. My mom said we were leaving. She introduced me to the man, John, and told me that we were going to stay at his house for a little while. John put his hand around my mom's shoulder, and I gasped. Mom cheating on my dad? Is this why she had been so weird this whole time? I tried to get out of the car, but my mom and John blocked me, keeping me trapped in the back seat. I started screaming for help. I didn't want to be a part of my mom's infidelity at all. Then, headlights shone on the house and the car. My dad was home. Apparently, he didn't go on his trip. The look on my mom's face was pure terror. John slammed the car door on me, closing me in, and then my mom and dad fought. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but eventually the cops arrived and dragged my dad away. From that point on, my life was a nightmare. The cops took my dad for being aggressive during the fight, but I honestly felt bad for him. Before I knew it, I was living with my mom at John's house. And I did not like John at all. He didn't try to get close to me. He barely even talked to me, but he was all over my mom constantly. He was basically obsessed with her, and it made me super uncomfortable. My mom explained to me that she was sorry, but this was what was best for us. I told her I just wanted to be with Dad, but she just wouldn't listen to me. Every time I tried to call him, my phone wouldn't go through. I didn't understand where he was or why he wasn't answering me. This went on for a couple of months. I spent most of my time with James, my boyfriend, but even he thought the situation was sketchy. He told me he had weird feelings about John. John had even warned him to be careful around me or bad things would happen. That sent shivers down my spine. I was just trying to keep my sanity in this insane new world. One night, I woke up to music playing in the front yard. I opened the window to see my dad standing in the grass, blasting music out of his phone and telling my mom and I to come out. I tried to run out to see him, but John stopped me in the hallway. He grabbed me and threw me over his shoulder, pulling me, kicking and screaming back into my room. He held the door so I couldn't get out. My dad walked away after John yelled at him. I didn't understand why, and I was so hurt. Every time I tried to talk to my mom or John about it, they would fight with me. I was fed up. Things with John and my mom got worse and worse. It felt like it was all about them, and I was just a burden. When they left for a business trip, I was honestly relieved. For once, John was decent. He gave me the keys to his car and told me to just relax by the pool all week. Of course, I invited James over to keep me company. We had a great time together. One day, I decided to dip in the pool and relax. James didn't swim, but I think he definitely enjoyed the view anyway. But about halfway through swimming, I started to feel horrible. My vision was blurry, and my stomach was throbbing with pain. When I looked at my hands, they didn't even seem like mine. I tried to stay above water, but I started to completely black out. The last thing I saw was James's panicked face. When I woke up, I couldn't believe my eyes. I heard beeping all around me, and doctors that sounded panicked. I touched my face and realized there were tubes in my mouth, and there was cloth over my eyes. What had happened to me? Had I drowned? Had I had a seizure? It was then that I realized how much pain I was truly in. My insides felt like they were on fire. I tried talking or crying, but I couldn't. I had to just lay there until I finally knocked out again. My life was like that for days. I couldn't see. I could only hear as I drifted in and out of consciousness. At times, I could hear James at my side, reading to me or telling me he loved me. Then it would be my mom and John. Honestly, having John nearby made me wish I would just pass out again. On one day, I actually heard my dad try to enter the room. Him and my mom got into a massive fight. She was screaming at him to get away, and he said that with me injured, I needed both of them to work together to help. My dad was right. There's nothing in that moment that I wanted more than my dad. It took about 2 weeks, but finally, I was starting to feel stable. The doctors unwrapped my eyes and kept a close look on me. My vision was garbage. I could still see, but it was like I was looking at the world through dirty glasses. The doctor sat at my bedside and told me the truth. I had been severely poisoned by someone who put a chemical agent in my pool. The coma I was in and the seizures I had meant I was going to have to learn how to walk all over again. My skin had burns all over it, and it was going to take me years to look normal again. I started to cry. I felt like I was a monster. Then the doctor asked me who would try to poison me. Was there anyone out to get me? Anyone who had influenced me to get into the pool? Immediately, my mind went to John. He told me to relax by the pool. He made sure I did it while they were out of town. And this whole time, he had wanted my mom, not me. I was convinced it was him. When I confronted them with that, my mom told me I was insane. John had tears in his eyes. He swore he had nothing to do with it, but I saw through him. He hadn't wanted me in his family at all. He had just wanted my mom. So much so that he took her away from my dad. So much so that he was willing to poison me. I was so mad. I told the hospital that they weren't allowed to see me anymore. I told them the only person I would see was my dad. Unfortunately, he didn't visit. I tried calling him, but my number still wouldn't go through. For weeks, it was just James and I. I had to go through painful surgeries. I had tubes in almost every part of my body, and I couldn't even walk myself to the bathroom. The doctors even had to shave my head for one of my surgeries. It was horribly embarrassing. And once I was nearing the end, James stopped showing up. I went to my physical therapy appointments alone, with tears in my eyes. When I texted James, I got no response. When I looked at his social media, I realized I was blocked. Just like that, I was completely and totally alone in the world. Or so I thought. I really lucked out with my physical therapist because he was a hottie. A smoking hot babe of a man. His name was Miles, and when he saw me crying, he wiped my tears. It wasn't long before we were hanging out after physical therapy. My hospital stay was coming to its end, and I realized I had nowhere to go. I was freshly 18, my mom had cheated and run off with a guy who tried to poison me, and my dad was absolutely nowhere to be found. I'm not proud of this, but for a few days after my release, I slept in the park on a bench. I went around different fast food places desperately trying to find work. I eventually got 2 jobs at 2 different fast food spots so I could make ends meet and afford an apartment, and thank God I did. Some of the things I saw while I was living in the park were not okay. The whole time I was in the park, my mom was desperately looking for me. She kept calling me, but I knew she wouldn't leave John, so there was no point in even bothering with her. Once things calmed down, I tried to talk to the cops about getting John arrested, but they kept telling me there was nothing they could do. They didn't even think it was John, which was totally insane to me. I was heartbroken, but as time went on, Miles was there to help me. He saw me at my worst, and he was there for me through all of it. He moved into my apartment, and for a while, my life was stable. I would get random, creepy calls from my mom and John every once in a while, but the horror of him trying to poison me started to fade into the background. Then I got some incredible news. I was pregnant. After all I went through, I was going to have a baby with a man who loved me, and everything seemed right in the world. Except I still felt like I was missing something. I knew I didn't want my mom involved with the baby, but I definitely wanted my dad involved. When I was about 7 months pregnant, I went on a mission to find him. I visited all the old places he used to go. I called all of his old friends. I even went to my old house and asked the owners if they knew where he was, but there was nothing. I started calling all the hospitals trying to reach him, and that's when I really started to worry. Had my dad been hurt? Was he homeless now? Finally, I called the last hospital on the list, and they told me that he had been in their custody for over a year. But it wasn't a normal hospital. It was a psychiatric hospital. Had my dad been so torn up about my mom cheating, he had lost his mind? I drove over to the hospital as fast as I could. When I saw my dad, my heart broke. He was skinny and scared looking. When he saw me, his eyes lit up and he hugged me. We talked about the good old days, and he rubbed my belly, telling me how proud he was that I was going to be a mom. I told him I wanted him to be a part of my life and asked how he ended up here. He told me my mom had him committed after she cheated on him and the doctors wouldn't let him go. I couldn't believe it. I promised him I would sign him out. He had raised me for almost my whole life. Now it was my turn to repay the favor. I told him he could come live with me. When I signed him out, the doctors tried to tell me not to, but I didn't listen. I know my dad, and I knew my mom was the real crazy one. My dad slept on the couch of our house, and he helped around a lot. He cleaned the dishes and cooked, and all around he seemed kind of normal. But whenever I mentioned Mom, he would get really upset. He took my car every night to drive to work at his job as a janitor at a local school, and having him around was a dream. Him being gone at night meant Miles and I had our own private time. But soon, Miles was eager to have him out of the house. He told me my dad creeped him out, and I didn't quite understand it. Miles told me my dad had said some weird things about family to him, but I kind of brushed it off until I couldn't anymore. One morning, I got in my car and it smelled disgusting. The back seat had empty containers of what looked like bleach. My heart was pounding, and I knew something was wrong. When I tried to pull out of the yard, a cop car pulled out in front of me. They put me in handcuffs and put me in the back of their car for questioning. I was so confused. Being 8 months pregnant at this point, I was terrified something would happen to my baby. When the cops sat me down, they were actually nice to me. They explained that there had been a cluster of poisonings in family pools around town in the past month. Poisonings just like the one that had happened to me. They hadn't happened in years, and suddenly, with my dad's release, they were happening again. I didn't want to believe it. My dad wasn't a murderer. He didn't poison people. Why would he ever want to hurt me? He could never do something so horrible. But about an hour later, the cops pulled my dad in, and they were carrying evidence behind them. My dad had poisoned the pool of a house right by the station, and they caught him red-handed. When they brought him in for questioning, John and my mom showed up. I was so terrified and confused that I hugged my mom. She cried and explained the truth to me. She hadn't cheated on my dad. My dad had been threatening to hurt her and me for years. When she left in the middle of the night with John, it was because it was her only chance to escape. I had been too young to realize how abusive he was to her. The cops finally got the truth out of my dad. He had poisoned the pool and I in an attempt to bring our family back together. He thought the tragedy would make us a family again, when in reality, it tore us apart even more. When he was released, he started doing it to families' pools, hoping it would make families more united and closer together. The logic made me sick. For the first time ever, I saw my dad for what he was, a sick, sick man. He was sentenced to jail for a long time, and I even testified against him. My mom and John are both in my life. I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. And although life has been weird, I'm thankful to have my weird little family.
Hi, my name is Carla. I'm 17 years old, and after my parents passed, I lived with my older sister Stacy and her husband. My parents passed 2 years ago. They died in a terrible car crash on their way back from a business trip in a neighboring town. They co-owned a big corporate business they ran together, and they had really gone on to make names for themselves. I was devastated when I heard the news. My relationship with my parents wasn't like most teenagers. Other teenagers fought and squabbled with their parents at every opportunity. Me? I had a different life. Both my parents were two of my best, if not my best friends. We went out to the movies and to restaurants together. We played and had fun like a regular bunch of teenage friends. Of course, they were stern when they needed to be, but every time they were, I knew that I was in the wrong. So, you can imagine how devastating it was to hear the news on television one night that the two business moguls who were my parents had died in a terrible car accident on their way back from a business trip. My best friends were gone. My sister Stacy already moved out of the house a long time ago. It had just been my parents and I for so many years. And It was so amazing how they had managed to take time out for me, even though they were so busy. The news hit me so hard, I sank into depression. The lively, happy Carla that everyone knew had disappeared. In her place was only someone who looked like her. As time went on, I grew worse and worse. I started to withdraw completely from my friends, and I refused to speak to anyone. I came to school in the mornings with swollen eyes, swollen from crying all night and hardly getting any sleep. My sister was crushed. She loved my parents too, but she knew she didn't have the type of relationship with them that I had, and seeing me so sullen filled her heart with pain. She had tried all she could, but nothing was working. She had brought counselors, therapists, and even psychics to help me with my grief, but there was nothing they could do. I just couldn't get better. As the months passed, I sank deeper and deeper into my depression. I was now so alone. I turned to destructive habits for company. It all started with buying drugs from a man who sold them on the corner of the street where I lived with my sister. When I realized they had a way of getting me happy, even for a short time, I couldn't stop. I kept buying them until I became such a wreck. Soon enough, I started on alcohol and smoking, looking for anything at all that could get me as happy as the drugs did. By now, I was so invested in it, I couldn't stop. This continued for a while, and by now, everyone in school knew the kind of life I lived. I came to school every day, either drunk or under the influence of some drug, and by now, that was what everyone had come to expect of me. My sister was embarrassed every time the school authorities called her to come pick me up after making a scene, and that happened almost every day. I was worse than a shadow of myself, and deep down, I knew I had let this depression go too far, but I just couldn't bring myself to stop. I couldn't find my way back. I was too far gone. One day, I went back home to my sister's house early from school after the principal annoyed me. He had called me into his office, giving me a last warning after I slammed a basketball in my gym teacher's face for correcting me, leaving his face seriously swollen. "If you throw another fit at the teachers or anyone else, you will be expelled," he said. "We've accommodated this nonsense long enough. You're not the first person to lose their parents. Get a grip on yourself." I was filled with rage. And maybe it was because, deep down, I knew that what the principal said was true. Maybe it was because, deep down, the truth he had blurted out so bluntly had stung me. I stormed out of the principal's office and slammed the door so hard I distracted the whole school from learning for a moment. "You can send me out of your stupid school for all I care," I said, well out of hearing distance. I didn't really want to be expelled. It would break Stacy's heart. And I knew it wouldn't have been what my parents wanted. I marched home and pulled a cigarette stick from my backpack as I left the school premises. Those idiots! Who needs them anyway? I marched on until I reached my sister's house, but I totally wasn't ready for what I saw next. My sister's husband was home. He obviously wasn't expecting me back home that early, but it was just noon. I froze in my steps as I saw him. My brother-in-law was nearly butt naked on the couch, and scattered all around him were empty containers of used drugs. Used needles littered the floor and the center table, and I couldn't believe my eyes at what I saw. My sister's husband used drugs too? When did he start? That explained why he rarely said anything every time Stacy tried to correct me. He would look at me, but not say anything. At first, I thought he was just staying out of what he considered not to be his business. I couldn't think straight after realizing this. Eventually, I got myself together and walked away to my room, looking away from him. All kinds of thoughts flooded my head all at once. Was I going to tell Stacy what I just saw? What if she left him? What if he was only battling with something terrible like I was, and the drugs were his only way of escape? No, I'm not going to be sympathetic. This could come back and haunt me and my sister later. It was decided. I couldn't wait for Stacy to get back from work. I had to tell her. As I was upstairs in my room waiting for her, her husband came knocking on my door. My heart pounded. "Go away," I said. "I don't want to see you." "I can explain," he said. "Please, don't tell Stacy. I used to be unable to quit drugs before I met your sister, and when she found out, she said she couldn't be with me if I didn't stop. I pleaded with her to stay, that I would try my best because I really loved her, and eventually she helped me through rehab. I was free until you came along with your drugs, alcohol, and smoking. Then all of a sudden, I found myself craving to use drugs again. I battled it for so long, but 3 days ago, I couldn't take it anymore. Please don't tell Stacy. This could be our little secret. See, I brought some new drugs for you to try out. Come on, you'll love it. Now I was offended. There I was, trying to get free, and Stacy's husband was trying to take me deeper in. Any thoughts of covering up for him immediately disappeared. When Stacy got back, I told her what I had seen. I told her I had seen her husband nearly butt naked, surrounded by empty containers of drugs and used needles. I told her that her husband had been using drugs. Stacy shot one look at her husband, begging him to deny it, and when he didn't, she exploded in a rage. Stacy was so mad and upset. I had never seen her like that before. She was screaming, crying, and yelling so hard. I knew by then neighbors already heard and knew what was going on. I walked up to her and tried to hug her to calm her down. "I'm sorry," her husband said, and crying on his knees. My sister wasn't having it. "Leave my house," she said. By now, tears were already forming in my own eyes. I knew the right thing to do was to tell my sister, but I didn't want her to lose her marriage. What if I had caught him cheating? What would she do then? Right there, I knew that I could never tell my sister that he had offered me some of his drugs to bribe me. She would never forgive him. I started to feel very guilty for what I had done. I only imagined that my sister would make him go seek help or something, not send him away completely. It probably hurt her more because she thought he was already done with drugs for good. But still, a pang of guilt flowed over me, especially because he said I had been the trigger that took him back. I didn't know what came over me. Suddenly, I started to beg my sister with tears in my eyes to give him another chance. Somehow, all of this made me realize how much pain I had caused all the other people in my life in the last 2 years. My friends, my sister, and now her husband. I was secretly begging for another chance for myself, to make things right, to try to repair all the damage I had done to everyone around me. Stacy looked at me beg so passionately, and compassion filled her eyes. She told her husband to leave, but that he could come back once he had sought help. I sighed deeply and hugged her, tears flowing down my face. This was a second chance for me too, and we would have to have our secret after all. Stacy must never find out that her husband offered me drugs, or else their marriage would be over. A few months have passed, and now I'm back to being the old Carla again. Stacy's husband too is doing great, and he's almost ready to be back at the house. Pretty soon, we'll be one big happy family.